Are you a dad of a child with a disability and you are hurting for a sense of community with each other or with other dads like you who understand your daily life experience? Are you looking for help, such as resources or just someone to talk to or ask questions? My guest is here to help in just a moment, so don't go anywhere.
Welcome to the Fatherhood Challenge, a movement to awaken and inspire fathers everywhere to take great pride in their role and to challenge society to understand how important fathers are to the stability and culture of their family's environment. Now, here's your host, Jonathan Guerrero.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. My guest is David Hirsch, a podcast host, a dad of 5, and a creator of a network for fathers raising kids with special needs called Special Fathers Network. David, thank you so much for being on the Fatherhood Challenge.
Jonathan, thanks so much for the opportunity. I really enjoy the work that you do.
One of my favorite questions is, what is your favorite dad joke? So what is your favorite dad joke?
I don't know if it's my favorite one, but here's one. Where do you learn to make banana splits?
Where do you learn?
Sunday school.
Did not see that one coming. Well, David, there has to be a story behind why you got involved with helping dads with special needs children and why you started Special Fathers Network. What is your story?
So when I became a father for the first time at age 27 years ago, I was looking for fatherhood resources and couldn't find what I was looking for, but stumbled across some statistics. 24 million kids growing up in father-absent homes, 4 out of every 10 in America, the perception that it's those poor inner-city Black kids, and it's really bad in the Black community. Maybe 7 or 8 out of 10 are growing up in father-absent homes. But in absolute numbers, there are 2 times the number of white versus Black children in America growing up without their dads. So it's not somebody else's problem. That led to helping start the Illinois Fatherhood Initiative, one of the country's first statewide not-for-profit fatherhood organizations, the signature program of which is the annual Father of the Year essay program, which has attracted, no exaggeration, more than 425,000 Illinois youth, K through 12, who write essays to the theme, What My Father Means to Me, fathers, grandfathers, stepfathers, father figures for that matter. And that organization still exists, and the mission of that Illinois Fatherhood Initiative is to actively engage fathers in the education of children. About 7 years ago, when my baby went off to college, I felt like God was talking to me, and he said, what I thought I heard was, you should do a cross-country bicycle ride. And I said, well, you obviously have the wrong person. I don't own a bike you could ride across the country, and I'm not an endurance bike rider. But I couldn't shake the idea. Talked to some friends who were known endurance bike riders, bought a bike, started training, put a crew together, put a plan together, flew out to LA, pedaled back from Santa Monica to Chicago, 21 days, 2,325 miles, and I lived to tell the story. I was then 54 years old, didn't know that I had something like that in me, and it was a transformative experience on a lot of different levels, and I felt like I found my voice. I had been talking about the importance of father involvement, but with all the media, print, radio, TV media that we were doing across the country, that led to giving a TEDx talk in October of 2015 entitled Why We Need to Break the Cycle of Father Absence. Beginning of 2016, I ended up writing a book, my first book entitled A Father's Journey to Break the Cycle of Father Absence, which is a little bit about the bicycle ride, more about the advocacy, and a little bit, I started talking then about the relationship or lack of a relationship that I had with my dad. So that was the beginning of the 21st Century Dads Foundation. And a couple, 3 years into it, it wasn't meeting one of our objectives. What I mean by that is that we had anticipated that we would be able to get the fatherhood programs, school-based, workplace programs to work together, and we couldn't. So we thought about closing the 21st Century Dads Foundation down. But before we did that, we thought we would identify the 4 most challenging areas for fathers that we could identify. The first was raising kids in high poverty areas, like urban areas. The second was working with incarcerated dads. Men have been removed not only from their family, but from society at large. The third was working with teen fathers, men who become fathers in most cases inadvertently as teenagers. And then the fourth area is working with fathers raising children with special needs. Those are the 4 areas that we found to be the most challenging. Our board, the not-for-profit board, narrowed it down to the last two categories: teen fathering, dads raising kids with special needs. And that was the beginning of the Special Fathers Network, this dad-to-dad mentoring program for fathers raising children with special needs. And our simple notion 7 years ago was that we would recruit a small army of seasoned dads who have 10 or more years of experience raising a child, or in some cases, children with special needs, and match them to the dads who are close to the beginning of their journey, raising a child with a similar or special need. So that's the
Oh,
short
wow.
story.
So basically, you have dads, older or more experienced dads, mentoring newer dads.
That's exactly it. So that's how it started. And then with storytelling, like I was making reference to the youth writing stories about their dads, somebody says to me one day, "Hey, Hirsch, what do you think about podcasting?" And I thought the question was, what do I like about listening to podcasts? I said that they're entertaining, they're informative. Some of them are, inspirational. They said, no, now what do you think about listening to a podcast? What do you think about hosting a podcast? I said, well, that's pretty comical. I'm an investment advisor. That's what I do occupationally. I have no experience with interviewing, no radio experience, no editing, no production experience, right? That's a funny thing. And I said, well, you should think about it. You'd be sincere. I think you'd do a good job. So those were the seeds that were planted that germinated very quickly into what we know today as the Special Fathers Network, or SFN Dad to Dad podcast, which just recently produced its 300th episode. So it's mostly dads, stepdads, granddads, father figures telling the story about raising a child or children with special needs. But I've also interviewed dozens of women now, and other healthcare providers, and just interesting individuals who have something to add about this important relationship that kids have with their dads. But in most cases, it has to do with dads raising kids with special needs. And so we're on the same page, John. We're talking about autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, rare disease, missing a limb, missing limbs, deaf, blind. There's no disability that's out of bounds. And it's very profound, right, to see the amazing things that these families are doing.
I was laughing earlier at the part of your story where you were telling that somebody was suggesting that you start a podcast, and you heard you heard something about listening to podcasts, and reminded me of my own experience. I had absolutely no desire or interest in doing a podcast at all. Really did not like to do it. I loved listening to them, and I listened to a lot of podcasts, but really, yeah, I just did not want to start one. My wife brought it up, and it was a very unusual thing for her to say. And it wasn't until I was driving by myself and I kind of let my thoughts wander on that topic, and I let my mind finally go to the idea that it was probably not specifically my wife, but that God was trying to call me and was using my wife to do that. And every hair on my body stood up, and I started to shake, and I felt like God was right there looking at me. And I realized, whoa, this is serious. This is actually a calling. This is not a joke. And so I went into a prayer about it, and I voiced my objections to God. To, and well, I figured be honest with him. It's not like he doesn't already know my thoughts anyways. So I was very blunt with him about how I felt about it, but I told him, you know what? I know who you are. I shouldn't be here. I've been broken, and you gave me my family back. You gave me back. I mean, you restored me. You did so much for me, and now you're trying to become my friend, and now you're asking me to do this. So I'm not about to say no. I'm just saying I'm going to say yes because it's you, and I know who you are. But as far as me, this is very uncomfortable. So I'll make a deal. You open up the doors, you take ownership of it, you set the agenda, you run things, and I'll be your human grunt. But I can tell you, to this very day, as sure as you and I are speaking, he's kept his end of the deal, which tells me everything that I need and everybody else needs to know about how he feels about fathers, how he feels about fatherless children, and how much he loves each and every one of us.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. So on the next question, I'm a dad of a son who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 3. Do you know very many dads with that experience? And how are they benefiting from being connected socially?
There are some dads in our network that have children with diabetes. That's 100% for sure. Um, but admittedly, that's not the main focus. As far as the number of interviews I've done, just to give you a sense, I've probably done 75 to 80 interviews on autism, 40 something on Down syndrome, maybe as many on cerebral palsy, maybe as many or more on rare disease, because there's like 6 or 7 thousand different rare diseases. And then there's a more limited number of disabilities that relate to physical disabilities as opposed to intellectual disabilities. So diabetes is real, right? It's life-altering, can be a life-ending experience if not treated. So I think we need to be super focused on addressing that. And, you know, diabetes can be managed, right? In some cases, rather successfully over a very long period of time. Certainly if it's gotten properly diagnosed and it's treated correctly. So um, I don't want to differentiate between, well, what is it like to be a father with a child with diabetes versus fill in the blank, right? We have some common fears and concerns, right? How's this going to affect my child's ability, right, to learn or physically develop? What's their future going to be like, right? What's my relationship with my child going to be like because of that? So these are all common experiences and fears that we have. And I think it's important to not say, oh, I only want to associate with other dads who have children with diabetes, right? That might be helpful, at least initially, because you have something in common. But I think that when you take a step back, when you widen your aperture and you understand that there's basic human concerns that we each have, we found with the groups of dads that we get together within the Special Fathers Network that it's less diagnosis specific and it's more important to be in contact with like-minded dads, right?
Yes. Yes.
Uh, not all of us are wired the same way, right? Some of us see our primary role as being the provider, a more traditional experience, right? I'm going to work, I'm going to provide for my family, I'm going to let my wife handle all things medical, all things educational. And I'm not here to judge, right? If that's what works for your family, God bless you. But I think more is expected of dads today than ever before, which is a good thing. We want dads to lean in. Being a dad doesn't mean one thing, but we've broken fatherhood into 4 different categories to help dads get a little bit more engaged, be present, physically, emotionally, and spiritually in their kids' lives. So obviously, there's a financial commitment, right? Dads are expected to be providers. But how do we be present physically, right? Especially for non-custodial dads, to be present physically is a challenge. The third is to be present emotionally. I'm not an emotional creature, right? Nobody wants an emotional financial advisor. I'm pretty sure of that. That's what I do for a living, right? Nobody wants an emotional like air traffic
Exactly.
controller, right? You want somebody who's going to be steady, right? Somebody who's going to be able to focus and stay, on task. And, so it's difficult for me, and I think a lot of other guys, to express their emotions, be empathetic, be sympathetic to others. You hear the phrase, hey, why don't you just put your big boy pants on, or, suck it up. And I think that, there's a place for that, but, I don't think that, that's what our family needs, right? I think we need to be a little bit more engaged, from an emotional standpoint. And then the fourth aspect of fathering quadrant that we talk about is being spiritually present. And who's the spiritual leader in your family? Sometimes it's both parents, sometimes it's the mom, sometimes it's the dad, sometimes it's nobody. And, maybe you didn't grow up in a spiritual home, but, it's something to think about, right? So we have a self-assessment tool that we created for dads to get some immediate feedback on their fathering, and it addresses each of those 4 areas.
Towards the end, I would like to cover how dads listening in our audience can access that tool. Going on to the next thing, I was wanting to really get into paternal postpartum depression, but the interesting thing about that is that takes me back to the time when I was sitting in the doctor's office and my son was being diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And the thoughts I went through, it started to spiral, and they said it could also be leukemia. And I kept thinking, well, I sure hope it's leukemia. Well, that's easy, because if it's leukemia, well, it's simple. You just get a bone marrow transplant and that's it. That's over with, and everything's good and life is normal. Um, and then waiting and the doctor coming back in and confirming it was type 1, and my heart sinking, spiraling emotionally, feeling very, very much disconnected, feeling alone. And the one thing that I was hurting for the most would have been something like what you're offering now, a network of dads that I could connect with, that I could talk to, not specifically just type 1 dads, but dads who were dealing with other things as well, some of them harder than what I was about to deal with. That really would have done a lot for my own mental health, helping me to be able to move on and see life past what I was facing. The next question I have is, how can a special needs child impact the dynamics of a marriage, and how can dads be prepared to handle it?
It's a great question. Thanks, John. Um, so you're focused on the marriage, and something that I've tried to drill down on with each of the interviews that I do very similarly is to ask, what impact has the child with disability had on his or her siblings, if there are siblings, your marriage, and the extended family, like grandparents, aunts and uncles, etc., because it has an impact on all three of those. It's various, right? It impacts different families differently. So I'll start by answering your question, not about marriage, but about the siblings, right? Birth order has something to do with it. And the trap that parents need to try to avoid is that the child with the disability is going to, by definition, require more time and resources, right, than the other children, just because of their situation. And you don't want to wake up a year, a decade, or longer down the road with the aha that, oh my gosh, I didn't give my other child or children, the attention that they deserved, right? Because I was so focused on the child with special needs. So that's one thing to be aware of. And there are great resources, sibling resources in the marketplace. The second part is, you asked about marriage. If you started with a strong marriage, hopefully it just strengthens your marriage. If you're in a weak situation before the diagnosis, it's almost anybody's bet as to where that's going to go. So it has the ability to strengthen, get mom and dad on the same page and working together, against the disability and overcoming the challenges. And, some of the challenges exist that both parents aren't knowledgeable and accepting of the diagnosis. And I think the message is, you need to give your partner grace, right? When they're not at the same level that you are. And that's not always saying the mom is ahead of the dad or the dad's always ahead of the mom. It just has an impact, right? Because we're not all dealing with the challenge in the same way at the same time. So that's the thought that comes to mind as it relates to the impact on marriage. I've seen it go both ways. It strengthens them and it's weakened them. And the third part of the question, at least the way I framed it, is, what impact has the disability had on the extended family? And depending on the disability and the family structure and how close they are, proximity geographically, it's a lot easier for families when there's extended family in the neighborhood, right, that they can help out, right? They can take some of the burden off of mom and dad to be doing everything so that they can, have a little bit more balance in their lives. But not everybody has family members close by geographically. And it's often that dads would report that, grandma and grandpa don't get it, right? They don't understand, the challenge because they didn't have a child with a similar special need when they were parenting. So it takes a little grace there to say, it is really hard for our extended family to appreciate, what the day to day is. And, hopefully they can be supportive and be involved. But if they can't or won't, you know, just accept that they might not fully appreciate or understand, what's going on. And just consider yourself fortunate that, if you do have an extended family and they can play a role, that they're able to be involved.
We love stories on this program. Please share some success stories of dads you've helped through the Special Fathers Network.
Like I said, with 300 plus episodes, many of the dads would say doing an interview, talking about their situation, shining some light on it has been cathartic, right? Just getting, open about it, right? Transparent about it. And, we've always been taught that, when you show vulnerability, it's a weakness, right? You don't want to show weaknesses, right? So we tend to hold those things in or hold them pretty close. So that's the general benefit, I think, that goes along with it. We have had some guys join our mastermind groups. These are the weekly meetup groups. We've been piloting these for the last 3 years on Wednesday nights, 2 years on Tuesday nights, and now we're setting a goal to recruit 100 new men into the mastermind group concept. These are virtual meetings on a weekly basis, and then we have an annual weekend retreat where we get all the dads together. The retreats have been in Nashville, St. Louis, and Chicago. Try to keep them in the Midwest to make it as easy as possible for people to get to and from and travel the shortest distance on average. And during these weekly meetings, we talk about wins. We review books, 6 books a year, so about 2 months per book. And then we have Zoom calls with the authors. These are all people within the network, by the way. We have not had to reach outside our network for interesting and meaningful books. And then the most meaningful aspect of this is the dad in the middle. We have 2 dads in the middle, about 15 minutes each per week. And dad gets to share a challenge or something that is going on. And it could have to do with the child with special needs. It could have to do with his marriage. It could have to do with something going on at work. It could have to do with his own health, anything, right? And it's private. The guys all listen and then they chime in. What about this or what about that? So we're getting to know each other on a really deep level. And then we end the meetings, these 75-minute meetings, with what are we looking forward to? So the point is, we want to start on a positive note. What was the win, small or large, from the past week? Because if we wanted to, we could all play the hardship Olympics and try to outdo each other, right, about how hard things have been the past week. That's not the forum that we've created. And so a couple of the dads come to mind. I'm not going to mention them by name, but if they were to listen to this podcast, they would know who they are. But oftentimes the dad is going to come in, he's in a lot of pain, right? He's not where he wants to be with his spouse. He's not where he wants to be psychologically with his relationship with his child or children. And it's really painful. He might be in therapy already, maybe not. And, he's looking for, whether he realizes it or not, an opportunity to just be authentic, be himself, and be in company with like-minded dads. And we've had a number of these dads. By the way, they pay $50 to $200 a month to be involved. Let me put another number to that. That's $600 to $2,400 a year to be involved in the mastermind group, right? This is not, one of these charity handout things. They're investing their time, and as importantly, they've got some skin in the game financially. That's why we have such a high attendance. And many of them would say that this saved their marriage, right? It saved their lives in some situations, like they were suicidal about their situation. And what a reassuring experience that is when these dads, share their testimony to one another and at these retreats that we have. So those are a couple of the thoughts that come to mind.
If there's a stepdad or possible stepdad entering the life of a special needs child, what should he expect and how should he prepare?
So we do have quite a few stepdads. Just by definition, a man who has married a woman who has a child or children with special needs. So he's come in with both eyes open, right? he's sort of being intentional about accepting the responsibility that goes along with being a father. And most of them would say, we don't differentiate between our stepkids and our biological kids. To be a father to a young boy or a young girl, with a disability. So the advantage that father has is that, he's not taken by surprise, not blindsided. Most parents, John, don't ask for children with special needs, right? Most of our dads would say, almost to a person, I would not have asked for a child with special needs. But many of them, I don't know if it's a majority, but certainly a plurality of our dads with a decade or decades of experience will tell you, I would not have asked for a child with special needs, but knowing everything I know today, I wouldn't change anything, right? I'm the person I am today. Our family is strong. We have great friends. It's strengthened, relationships all the way around. They didn't say it was easy. Some of them have a lot of hardship. In some cases, one or more of their children dies, right? I've done at least 24 interviews of dads that have lost a child, either from the time of birth, as a newborn, as a toddler, as a teenager, or somebody in their 20s or 30s for that matter. A lot of these kids are medically fragile, especially the ones with rare disease. Their life expectancies can be quite short. But I think that the advantage that the dads have, the stepfathers specifically, like you were asking about, is that they're coming in with both eyes open, right? And, I really, really admire those dads. Similarly, to dads that are adopting kids with special needs, right? These are amazing human beings. And as long as we're talking about this, one of the things that I've witnessed, John, is that the parents, moms and dads who are raising kids with special needs, on average, are more humble, less arrogant, and less selfish than the general population. And
wow.
Doesn't the world need more humble, less arrogant, and less selfish people?
Absolutely.
I am not making a statement, but you could read between the lines.
Well, David, how can dads connect with you, listen to your podcast, or learn more about Special Fathers Network?
The easiest thing to do is go to the website, 21stcenturydads.org. They can send me an email at david@21stcenturydads.org. And the podcast is on all the popular podcast platforms. It's known as the SFN Dad to Dad podcast. If you see it, it looks a little bit like the Superman logo. I would love to connect with any of your dads, whether they have a child with special needs, a family member with special needs or disability, or they just have questions, right? Because they're compassionate about this.
And just to make things easier too, if you go to thefatherhoodchallenge.com, that's thefatherhoodchallenge.com. If you go to this episode, look right below the episode description, and I will have the links that David just mentioned posted there. One thing I always enjoy about these times is learning things, and I definitely learned something from you, many things from you today, actually, and I know our audience did too. So thank you so much for being on the program.
Well, Jonathan, thank you for the opportunity. Let's give a special shout out to our mutual friend, Rena Friedman-Watts, who's the Ask Daddy podcast host, for introducing us.
Thank you, Rena.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Fatherhood Challenge. If you would like to contact us, listen to other episodes, find any resource mentioned in this program, or find out more information about the Fatherhood Challenge, please visit thefatherhoodchallenge.com. That's thefatherhoodchallenge.com.
I'd like to pause and thank our proud sponsor of the Fatherhood Challenge, Zencastr. If you've thought about podcasting before and realized that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencastr's all-in-one podcast production platform, you can create your podcast all in one place and distribute to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations. But the reason I personally use and trust them with the production of this syndicated radio program is their professional broadcast quality sound. There is no better time than now to start your podcast using Zencastr for all your needs. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code FATHERHOOD, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. I want you to have the same easy experiences I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story.